guys, it's Griffin and welcome back to my channel. For today's video, I'm going to be talking to you guys about another mystery. I love covering these on my channel and I know it's been a while since I've done one. I was kind of in a rut not to give the same spiel every other YouTuber gives all the time because, I don't know, everyone gets in the same place, I think, when they're on the platform for a certain amount of time. And I was in a little bit of a rut and I wasn't feeling motivated, and I finally did a bunch of research on this case. For the first time in a while, I've been excited to film just because I know that there is a ton of information on this case that not a ton of people know, and I want to share it. So without further ado, let's get started. This is a story of DeOrr Kunz Jr. and how he disappeared. This is still unsolved and currently being worked on, but there hasn't been a huge break in the case. DeOrr was just 2 years old and living with his parents Jessica and Vernal in Idaho Falls. They went camping all the time, and they even went camping the week before they went missing, and the day that DeOrr went missing they were also on a camping trip. So it just goes to show that they went camping all the time. It was part of their routine and it was something the entire family enjoyed. So it wasn't out of the ordinary that they were on this trip. Thursday, July 9th of 2015, everyone met up at Isaac Rainwan's house. Everyone being Jessica, Vernal, DeOrr, and Jessica's great-grandfather Bob, or Robert. Bob was the only person who knew Isaac, and that was everyone's first time meeting him. Bob and Isaac were neighbors for about 5 years, and Isaac oftentimes would go fishing with Bob, and he would even help him with different things around the house, so they developed a little bit of a friendship. Jessica planned this entire trip with Bob because it was somewhere that he had gone camping before, and he had Alzheimer's, and honestly, he was getting a little bit too old to go on all these different explorations, and he just wanted to go somewhere that he was familiar with. So, like I said, they met up at Isaac's house, and it's very unclear if they all rode up together or if they rode up separately. If they did ride up separately, they ended up arriving at the campsite at the exact same time, so they must have been following each other. But I do think they rode up together, and I think just a few of them were in the car and a few of them were in the camper that was attached to the car. By the time the group arrived at Timber Creek Campground, it was almost dark out, so Isaac went ahead and set up a little campfire, then he went ahead and set up his tent. Jessica, Vernal, and DeOrr went straight to bed in the back of Bob's Blazer, and then Bob went to bed in the camper. Isaac was up for a little bit, but then put out the fire and went to bed. The next morning, July 10th of 2015, when everyone woke up, they realized just how remote this campsite was. Obviously, Bob had been there before, so he was familiar with the terrain, but no one else had been there, and they realized that they traveled down a 7-mile road that the campsite was at the dead end of. Literally, it was just one straight road for 7 miles, and then at the dead end of the road was a campsite. Near the dead end, there's a picnic table, fire pit, and 10 to 20 feet away, down a super steep hill, there's a creek. According to Isaac, the group ate breakfast, and DeOrr was just kind of clumping around, and he says clumping around because DeOrr was in these boots that were 2 sizes too big for him, so these boots were like kind of falling off. He was trying to stay in them, and he was just like all over the place because he's a 2-year-old kid. He then went and picked up a few different pieces of rocks or sticks or random things like that and started throwing them into the fire, and his dad Vernal got mad at him and made him come sit down with everyone else because he was just tired of having to keep an eye on him over by the fire pit. After breakfast, Isaac went back to bed in his tent, and when he woke up, Jessica, Vernal, and DeOrr were all ready and packed up to head to town. They were just going to a little mini mart and they were gonna pick up some feminine hygiene products, some candy, and some gasoline. The group went to Stage Stop Junction Store in Leadore, which is about a 30-minute drive on rocky terrain from Timber Creek Campground. While they were gone, Isaac and Bob went fishing in various fishing holes, and they actually caught a ton of fish. This was an activity that both Jessica and Vernal liked to partake in, so when they got back, they saw the amount of fish that they caught and they were like, okay, we're getting our fishing gear and we're gonna go set up down by the creek, and that's when Bob suggested that Isaac showed them where he found all the fish. Before they went down to the creek, Jessica asked Bob if he could watch DeOrr, and he said yes. Jessica, Vernal, and Isaac started walking to the creek, and little DeOrr was following them. Vernal then asked him if he wanted to come with them or if he wanted to stay with Grandpa. He turned around and he saw his grandpa, and he saw that he had fresh candy from the store, so he was like, I'm gonna stay with my grandpa, and he ended up staying behind with him. Both parents continued on, assuming that little DeOrr went back to his grandpa, and even Jessica said that she kept checking over her shoulder to make sure that he wasn't following them. Isaac went ahead and showed them a few different fishing holes and then wanted to continue on his own fishing journey, so he went off further down the creek on his own. Jessica and Vernal were at the creek for about 10 to 15 minutes setting up their fishing gear, and when they saw a ton of minnows, they knew they had to get DeOrr because that was DeOrr's favorite thing when they went camping, is seeing all the minnows and all the fish in the water. If that were the case, though, I don't know why they wouldn't just have DeOrr come with them in the first place, but I don't know. This is just the timeline of the event. When Jessica and Vernal went to go get DeOrr, he was suddenly gone. gone. When they both asked Bob where he was, Bob said, well, he's right there. And when they looked right where Bob pointed, he wasn't there. In later interviews, Bob said, and I quote, "So Isaac and Jessica and DeOrr went to go look for fish and the kid was there with me, but I turned my head for a minute. I don't know for how long, 5 or 10 minutes, I don't know." So he admits to leaving DeOrr alone for at least 5 to 10 minutes, which is majority of the time that his parents were gone. Bob said he never went back inside his camper, but it's believed by authorities that he actually did, thus giving an opportunity for DeOrr to be left alone outside by himself, leaving no one to see what happened. The last place Bob was said to have seen DeOrr was at this little bush that was about halfway towards where his parents were and where Bob was himself. He said that DeOrr was either playing with dirt or his shoes or even like a little toy car just by his feet and sitting by the bush. In another interview with People magazine, Bob said there's a 4-minute window where no one had an eye on him. And then it's also been said that the grandfather assumed that DeOrr went with his parents. So the entire situation overall is just super messy. No one has any idea what truly happened, and from that moment, DeOrr has never been seen again. In interviews, Bob, Jessica's grandfather, refers to DeOrr as the kid or that kid, and I feel like it's kind of distancing himself from the situation. It almost seems weird to me because I feel like he should refer to him as DeOrr or as Little DeOrr or even as his nickname Little Man, but he doesn't call him any of those things. But then again, in those same interviews, Bob says that he isn't affectionate towards DeOrr and he doesn't give him kisses or hug on him like the women do. I don't know how their relationship works, but this entire situation just seems so off to me. Jessica immediately ran to the creek thinking that DeOrr may have walked off by himself and walked down by the creek either to follow his parents or just to walk off by himself. She was super worried about a possible drowning, so that was just her first thought and she needed to get over there immediately. They searched for about 30 minutes and after frantically searching, Jessica called her mom. I'm not entirely sure how she got service out here because it's a remote area that didn't have any towers nearby and little to no service from other campers who have camped there before. Anyway, her mom instructed her to call 911 right away, so she hung up the phone and called 911. The 911 call was placed at 2:28 p.m., roughly 1 hour after DeOrr went missing. A lot of the cases I've covered in the past don't have 911 calls that I can listen to with you guys, so I figured since this is one of the first cases that has that, I would play the 911 call on my phone and we can listen to it and discuss it together. It's a 5-minute call, so I probably won't be playing the full thing for you guys, but if you want to listen to it, I will have it linked down below and you can go listen. Other than that, let's get through this call and listen to the most important bits together.
What's the address of your emergency? I'm actually camping in Leadwood, just outside of Leadwood. My 2-year-old son, we can't find him.
Right off the bat, I want to say that Jessica sounds worried and concerned, and you can hear a little bit like of a wobble in her voice, but at the same time, she seems awful calm.
How long have you been missing? About an hour? Yeah. Are you by water? Yes. We need search and rescue.
So they just ordered search and rescue, so that's clearly the first people to get out there, along with the police.
Jessica? Jessica? Yeah. What's your son's name? What is it? DeOrr. O-R-R. What's his first name? That's his first name. DeOrr.
I've obviously read a ton of speculation about this call and kind of had some thoughts going into it, but this is my first time listening to the call because I wanted to listen to it with you guys. And you can tell that it's chopping up a little bit, so I do understand how they made the call because they clearly made it. It's 911, it's an emergency call, so it does go through, but it is a little choppy and it's hard to hear what she's saying. You can hear in the background as well that there's another police officer who's on the phone with Vernal. I rewinded it a little bit and you'll hear it coming up in just a second that he says in the background Vernal, like he's confirming that Vernal is on the phone. And also his mother is about to describe what he was last seen wearing, which is a blue top with pajama pants and a camo jacket with cowboy boots.
Okay, what is he wearing? He was wearing cowboy boots, a blue pair of like pajama pants, and a camo jacket. And he's got shaggy blonde hair. What's your name? Arnold?
Do you hear that in the background?
Is your husband calling too? Okay, all down where we were camping at, and we can't find him at all. Do you know how far outside of Ledor you are?
Ledor is the small town that they went to go get little snacks and feminine hygiene products and all of that stuff.
Okay, if you're headed towards Ledor, you take a right on the street across the street from the gas station. It would be a left. A left. And then there's a sign that says like Timber Creek and and you're gonna like from Idaho Falls. Okay, we need you to stay within cell service. We have people going on the way. Thank you. Wait a minute.
Vernal said when he placed his call, he drove 1.5 miles down the road to get service. But if Jessica was able to get service in that spot, then he should have been able to as well. It was actually later proven with cell phone pings that his phone was right next to Jessica at the time that the call was placed, so he didn't actually go 1.5 miles down the road. Now, I'm not sure why he would be lying about this because it doesn't seem like something that would make or break the case for him, so I'm kind of confused, but that's just something that was disproven. So like I said earlier, DeOrr was last seen wearing a blue shirt, pajama pants, camo jacket, and cowboy boots that were 2 sizes too big for him. It's thought that if these boots were 2 sizes too big for him and he had run off on his own or he were taken by someone or something, there would be at least one or even both boots left behind somewhere. And according to Vernal, within hours after the disappearance, it was raining and then it was super hot out. He thinks DeOrr would have taken his camo jacket off. Within hours, there were so many people searching for DeOrr. There was search and rescue, there were volunteers, there were people who worked at the campgrounds, and even family members drove out there to help. But despite all of that, nothing was found day one. Within the first 2 days, there were hundreds of people searching using so many different forms. People were searching on horseback, ATVs, by foot, helicopters, sonar, and even dogs. They focused on a 2.5 mile radius from where DeOrr was last seen. They also focused on and searched the creek numerous times. Sunday, July 12th, volunteer searchers were suspended and it was left up to authorities to continue searching. They just didn't want the area to be contaminated if there was anything there to find, so they decided it was better for just the authorities to be looking. All 3 campers left the campsite. Isaac went back home. Jessica, Vernal, and Bob went and held a candlelight vigil for DeOrr. The vigil was held the night of Monday, July 13th. Both parents are publicly interviewed and they state that they no longer think he is lost and that he has been abducted. Both parents at the candlelight vigil announced that they're going back to the campsite and they will continue searching until they find him. Saturday, July 18th is DeOrr's father's birthday, but there is still no sign of DeOrr. The family is still camping out at the site in hopes of finding something. There was no sign that DeOrr had ever been at this campsite, which was so confusing because as far as forensics go, there's usually a sign of something, whether it's hair, skin, a piece of clothing, or just anything. And you would think because he's a 2-year-old kid that there would be some sort of trace of him at this campsite somewhere. There were also no signs that an animal got him. Months after DeOrr went missing, Jessica and Vernal were both named persons of interest by law enforcement. However, they both continue saying that they had absolutely nothing to do with it. The couple had split up and had since started seeing new people. Jessica actually ended up getting married just a couple months after DeOrr went missing to a completely different guy. In fact, none of the people who were at the campsite that weekend talked to each other much anymore. Now let's get into the private investigators where it gets just even more confusing. So there were 2 different private investigators. As the first private investigator, Frank Vill, was a family friend who just wanted to help them out. He saw what was going on and he knew that they needed some sort of help, and so he offered a helping hand. He then, just a few weeks after joining the case, withdrew himself from the case because he felt that both parents were not being truthful with him. He felt that they lied and misrepresented the true facts that could help find DeOrr. Another private investigator who was hired by the family, but they weren't actually the ones paying him. Him and his entire team were being paid out by a GoFundMe that was started for this exact purpose. The GoFundMe raised about $20 to $25K, which Philip Klein and his team used to bring in a ton of different resources and really examine everything. Philip had over 20 hours of interviews on tape with each adult from the campsite. None of their stories were adding up, and they began to turn on each other. Within weeks of Philip working with the family, he had to sit down with them and have the difficult conversation of, hey, I think you had something to do with this and I'm not comfortable working on this case for you guys any longer. So yet another private investigator withdraws himself from this case. After he withdrew himself from the case, he released all of his findings. So let's get into those and see what he uncovered. Both Jessica and Vernal denied going on any media outlets. They denied slots from Nancy Grace, Good Morning America, and so many other outlets that it was honestly kind of crazy. After DeOrr disappeared, they only made one appearance. When asked why they were media shy, they said they were damned if they did, damned if they didn't, that they couldn't figure out what the media wanted, what anyone wanted from them, that they were actually out there trying to find their kid, and that they didn't want to spend time answering the same questions over and over just to not help in any way. But I really think that media outlets help, because if someone had seen something, whether it was them when they were in the town at DeOrr, whether it was someone seeing them at the campsite or anything along those lines, anyone in the area knowing about this case, it was considered helpful. I understand where they're coming from on this just a little bit, because I do understand getting ridiculed like crazy and also just being tired of answering the same questions over and over, because I myself have done press circuits. Although it's not been for a missing child of mine, I've had to go on multiple different press outlets and answer the same questions over and over, and quite honestly it is frustrating. So I understand where they're coming from on that point, and also when they're getting ridiculed, it's just not fun. But if you're a parent and your kid has gone missing, don't you think that you would want to do absolutely anything in your power that you could possibly do to help find your kid, even if people would judge you and ridicule you? Just about 5 months after DeOrr went missing, Philip Klein had interviews with Vernal, Bob, and Jessica. They literally all started pointing fingers at one another and at Isaac. Both of the parents kept mentioning that Isaac was kind of odd and they weren't sure about him from the beginning, and they said that when they questioned him about when he last saw DeOrr or where he was, he kept saying, I don't know, and I have no idea, and like, I don't really want to be a part of this, and to them was just being kind of odd. Then in those same interviews, Bob, when asked if he trusts Isaac, said no, which confuses the crap out of me. If you don't trust someone, you usually don't bring them on a trip. When Bob was asked why he brought Isaac on these trips, he said it was because if he fell over or if he got hurt or he needed a helping hand, Isaac would always be there to help him. But why would you go alone on a trip with someone that you don't trust and feel comfortable with that? Like, that just does not make sense or add up to me. Jessica said that Isaac brought a shovel on the trip, and after DeOrr went missing, he was holding the shovel and there was apparently a blonde hair at the end of it. When Jessica went to go grab the hair, it apparently flew off the shovel and was never seen again. But this seems kind of odd to me and just seems like something that she made up in her head and threw in there to kind of get police off of her track. I also saw reported in one place that Isaac was actually the last one to see DeOrr alive, but I really don't know if this is true. It could have just been something that someone said, or it could have been a misprint or something along those lines, but that is something that I did see. When the family was denying all of those media outlets, Philip decided to get together $20,000 of his own money and offer it to the family for them to offer up to the public for any information leading to DeOrr. The family then denied this offer. After that, Philip had enough and knew that he could no longer work for the family and help them out in any way, shape, and or form, because he felt that they had something to do with it. Philip said in his withdrawal letter that he believes the parents are hiding what truthfully happened and they are using the searches to cover up a possible crime that one or both of them may have committed. However, after quitting the case, Philip was quickly rehired by someone who wanted to be kept anonymous. So after Philip had gone through absolutely all of the evidence, he had a few things to say. He actually went back to the campsite to follow up and prove or disprove all these different things that Jessica, Vernal, Bob, and Isaac were saying. When at the campsite, he came to the following conclusions. First, DeOrr Kunz was deceptive, had failed 5 polygraph tests, and had told 6 completely different stories to investigators. He was then declared a suspect in homicide either by accident or intentional means. Jessica had been deceptive, failed 4 polygraph tests, and had told 5 different stories to investigators. She too was named a suspect in homicide. Robert or Bob Walton had also been deceptive, had told 2 different stories to investigators, and was inconclusive on his 1 polygraph test. But also keep in in mind that he does have Alzheimer's. He was declared both a person of interest and a witness to homicide. And finally, Isaac Raymond was truthful. He had told the same story to KIC investigators 4 different times. But after all of the interviews, Isaac was still considered a person of interest or a witness to homicide. And according to Philip, all of those statements are still truthful and, if anything, have become stronger. In June of 2016, investigators flew into Leadore, Idaho, and they completed a 5-day targeted search where they went in to prove or disprove each and every statement from any witness or anyone who was at the campsite. Investigators flew in Tracy Sargent and her dog Chance, who is a well-known and highly respected searcher from the state of Georgia. Also from Georgia is Jane Holmes, and she is well known for her interview and operation skills. During the 5-day operation, law enforcement agents from both Lemhi and Bonneville counties were represented. During the 5-day operation, they had a few things that they wanted to determine. This is what they wanted to determine and their findings. First of all, they did studies to see whether Jessica and Vernal's stories matched up or were even remotely true. No matter how hard they tried, they failed each and every time to verify any testimonies or any timelines. They studied cell phone directional pings, and they proved that Vernal's testimony was fabricated, and also determined that his statement that he drove 1.5 miles down the road to get service was just not true. There was also a site location study to prove or disprove Bob and Isaac's testimonies. What Bob and Isaac were saying could not have physically happened according to what they found. Whether this means the placement of where Bob was when DeOrr went missing, or where Isaac was when DeOrr went missing, or where they were when the parents were down by the creek, no one really knows, but they just know that what they were saying was not truthful. There was also 2 different dog searches, one of which had 5 hits, and the second search was 2 separate sites that they specifically wanted to search. Again, all of these were found by Chance, who was an extremely well-trained cadaver dog. This dog could literally find anything. He was highly trained on human decomposition and human blood decomposition. So, like I said, there were 5 different hits within the first search. The first is a diaper tree area. Basically, there was a tree that had 1 diaper hung on it, and it's what DeOrr's parents said that they were using to hold the diapers. Although there was only 1 diaper on it, which seems weird for an overnight camping trip. Anyway, there was a hit to that spot, although there was no evidence obtained from that area. The second spot was just 139 feet east of the cattle guard in the campground. It was in a loose ground area, and there was actually an excavation undertaken at this exact location, but the private investigator and his team couldn't really find anything within it, so they sent it over to law enforcement to be further examined, and we haven't heard anything about it since. And just 10 feet east of the campsite, they found the 3rd hit. This hit was just another dead end, unfortunately, because it was found that there had been an animal buried at that site, and when the animal was being buried, they believe that the person who was burying the animal at this site cut their hand while burying it and had a towel or some sort of cloth that they wrapped around their hand and buried along with the animal. There was another hit 2.24 miles east of the campsite. This next hit that they found was very oddly specific, so I'm going to look at my phone for this just because I want to make sure that I'm getting this pinpoint exactly. The 4th hit was 2.24 miles due northeast of the 15-mile point stake in the ravine near 221 Southeast Fence. Holy, that was a mouthful, but that was where the 4th hit was found. And investigators turned this area over to law enforcement, and nothing has been heard since. And the 5th and final hit was just 0.75 miles east of the campground. This spot in particular is where investigators believe there was some sort of body being held. Keep in mind that this is a speculation, and none of this has been confirmed by police or investigators, but this is what the investigators publicly were speculating. And they clearly have some sort of evidence or something to lead them to these sites or to lead them to these thoughts. But especially on the 5th hit, because on earlier hits they said they couldn't find much and they would hand it over to law enforcement. But on the 5th hit, they were pretty positive that this was some sort of holding site for a body. So now let's go into the secondary searches with the dogs. There were 2 different spots that they wanted to search in this secondary search, and the first was the Clegg residence. This was DeOrr's grandmother. Her residence in Idaho Falls was searched with permission, and there was absolutely no evidence found. However, area number 2 was proven to be quite successful in their searches because this site in particular was where both Jessica and Vernal had previously been living, and they had left abandoned. Both of them had been evicted for not paying rent, and they completely left the apartment with all their furniture and all their stuff and just literally up and left. The landlord was kind of just confused and cleaned out their apartment and got rid of a ton of their stuff and moved it to a nearby dump site. Luckily, the investigators got there in time and were still able to go through all of the stuff that was left behind at their apartment. After going through the abandoned waste, investigators were shocked. They found quite a few things. The first thing that they found were 4 different Matchbox cars previously described as missing with DeOrr. The second thing that they found was the camo jacket that they said DeOrr went missing in. The third thing is a credit card used by a family friend to make purchases unknown to investigators within the days that DeOrr went missing. And number 4 was an insurance tracking device box and instruction package. This is something insurance companies provide you with. The idea is that if you feel like you're a safe driver, you can keep this box in your car, and it tracks your speed, routes, and general driving information. If they didn't want people to know where they were and what they were up to, it makes sense to either not install it or remove it before doing certain things to commit or hide a crime. Investigators took 4 weeks with all the information that they found to finally release their statements. I'm gonna read their preliminary statements and let you guys know what they were thinking when it came to this case. First, they believe that Jessica and Vernal were both being deceptive and had intent to cover up a crime. Second, they believed that this investigation was no longer a missing persons, they believed it was a homicide. Third, they have absolutely no evidence to prove that DeOrr was ever at the campsite with the 3 other campers, other than these campers' testimonies. Fourth, this one is a very long one, so I'm going to be reading it, but they basically said that they believe that the parents, through family members and through friends on social media, in a very small group of people, like 4 or 5 people maybe, have begun a misinformation operation on behalf of the parents to impugn the jury pool, mislead the media, mislead law enforcement, and mislead investigators with KIC Texas, as well as the public in general. So basically, they thought that the parents were having different friends and family members of theirs post or talk about different facts of the case and kind of mislead the public or law enforcement or the jury or anyone who had their eyes on this case. And 5, because they could not find a single witness when the family went back in town who saw DeOrr, they finally decided to move the start time of the timeline to 5 p.m. the day before because they weren't entirely sure if DeOrr had truly gone on this camping trip. Before we get into our theories, I want to go over a little bit of a brief history on both Jessica, Bob, and Isaac. I could find absolutely no information on Vernal. The only thing I could find about him was something that happened after DeOrr went missing, which is actually the fact that he got in a terrible car accident with someone he was dating at the time and their child. He was rushed to the hospital and everyone in the crash was said to be okay, but that was literally the only thing that I could find of him. When it came to Jessica though, a few people had some things to say. According to people close to her, she actually had quite the hard time working with kids. Apparently she would get agitated easily, frustrated, and wasn't really patient and seemed just overall uninterested in kids. I'm not sure if this is true, but according to some sources, she left DeOrr at daycare for longer than she was supposed to and actually would sometimes even leave him unattended and not even be paying attention to him. She has 2 other kids with a previous marriage of hers, and she sees those kids every other weekend and only on the weekend. And I've heard it's because she is kind of just not really there as a parent and is inadequate as a parent, so she's not really in their lives much, and their father decided that she wasn't the person to have custody over them. Now, when it comes to Isaac, he has a lot going on with him. He was diagnosed as bipolar, and in 2006, he was charged with a felony rape, but that charge was amended down to a misdemeanor domestic battery. It wasn't against a child, and although that doesn't make it okay, and although that doesn't rule out the fact that he may have had something to do with DeOrr, it just goes to show that his interest may not be children when it comes to something that turns him on sexually. For all I know, that could be what he's interested in, but this particular charge was not against a child, is what I'm trying to get across. Sheriff officials have told different news outlets that he is not considered a sex offender, but they did say, and I quote, "He does have a criminal record, however the police reports are not consistent with his records, and I'm not entirely sure why." lie. When he woke up the morning after DeOrr went missing, he said to several people, "It's the best night's rest I've had in a long time." Which, first of all, I just think is a really weird thing to say. Like, you don't say that if a kid has just gone missing, and you just don't say that in general. Like, that's just not something that comes out of your mouth when you know that a young child has just gone missing in your presence. You avoid saying that at all costs. And it has also been shown that he never searched for DeOrr once. The only information I have on Bob that is relevant to you guys, which I think I've already mentioned multiple times before, is that he has Alzheimer's, and the person who was his caretaker was Jessica, because she was one of the people who knew him the best and who felt like she could be up for the job. I feel like I have been rambling for like literally an hour. I don't even know how long this video is going to be. It's crazy. There's so much information regarding this case, but now that you guys have all of the information that I have collected, if you guys have any additional information, make sure to comment it down below. But now that you guys have all the information that I've collected, it's time to get into the theories. The first theory is that there was some sort of wildlife attack, which I just do not see as being likely. But perhaps DeOrr had wandered off and was attacked by some sort of wildlife. The problem with this theory is that if this were the case, there would be some sort of site that this happened at, where there would either be a lot of blood or some sort of clothing left behind or his skin or something, you know? And there was just absolutely no sign of that. The second theory is abduction. This is the theory that both Jessica and Vernal, his parents, believe. There is only one road/way to get to this campsite, and this isolated road runs for 7 miles to a dead end, which is where the campsite is. I don't think that there would be much interaction on this road. It also just isn't likely that a car could drive up to the campsite without at least one of the people at the site realizing that it drove up randomly and they didn't know who it was. Like, someone would notice. Unless Jessica, Isaac, and Vernal were all down by the creek and Bob had stepped inside his camper and left DeOrr alone, there's just absolutely no way that someone could have come down to the campsite and taken DeOrr. Although, according to Vernal, there is one location near the reservoir that you can stand just above the campsite and look down at it, and you can see this entire campsite, but the campsite can't see you. So he thinks that someone was watching them at the campsite and knew the exact time to attack. Theory number 3 is the family did it. The first one being there's a woman who runs a restaurant in Lemhi County, and some people have said that she may be involved. People say that Jessica and Vernal both knew that DeOrr was dead and they had absolutely no idea what to do with it, so they went to this lady and asked for help and offered her $1,000 to dispose of the body. And this has actually been disproven by police, but this is still a theory believed by some. Another theory, which I touched base on earlier, is that some people believe that this whole trip was a ruse and that DeOrr was never at the campsite to begin with. That something happened to him before they ever went to the campsite, and this trip was just to distract everyone from the fact that something happened. The fourth theory is Jessica and Vernal gave DeOrr up for adoption. Some people believe that when they went to town to get some products from the store, that they met up with a family and they gave DeOrr to them and they just didn't want DeOrr anymore, and that's what it was. People think that with this theory they wanted to just give DeOrr up for adoption, but not the legal way. And this is actually a theory that Frank Vilt, the first private investigator, believes. Maybe they just made up the whole lie about going to the shops and getting stuff just so that they could meet up with the family to give DeOrr to them. And when they came back to the camp, Jessica's grandfather is clearly confused. He has Alzheimer's, and they tell him that DeOrr is going to stick with them, and then they head down to the creek and DeOrr is just not there ever to begin with. That is just kind of how people believe this theory works. And the fifth and final theory has to do with Isaac. Clearly, I've told you guys a ton of information of the family thinking that he was a little odd or that they didn't trust him, and he was even off by himself with no witnesses while DeOrr went missing. He could have taken DeOrr while he was supposed to be fishing and while the grandfather was not paying attention and while Jessica and Vernal were down by the creek. It could have just been the perfect moment that he took DeOrr, killed him, and then went and held his body somewhere else. Possibly one of those places the cadaver dogs found a hit on. He could have then moved it later, and just another thing, like I said earlier, he has said to have not helped with the search, which I just find to be so strange. At one point in 2016, private investigator Philip Klein said to one news outlet that Jessica came forward to him and actually admitted to knowing where DeOrr's body was. But literally that was the only time that I've seen that online, and I tried so hard to find other outlets that had that information or other places that he told that to or just any other coverage of that information, and I could not find a single thing about it, just the one article. So that may be a lie, I don't know, but I just wanted to point that out before closing out this video, that Jessica may have admitted to knowing where DeOrr's body was, and that may not be on tape or proven, and that may just be something that he's saying, like, she admitted it to me and I don't have proof of it, but let's figure this out. Like, that just may be what the situation is, but just needed to get that out there. If you have any information regarding this case, please call Lamhi County Sheriff's Office at 208-756-8980. Again, that's 208-756-8980. If you have any information, I will have other sources on how you can submit it below. This case is so frustrating because it was a 2-year-old boy who went missing, and he had his whole entire life ahead of him, and there's just, you guys know the statistics, and there's just, it's not likely that he's still alive, and it breaks my heart to even think about this situation with like my little brother or someone that I know. All I have to say is someone out there knows something, and whatever you know, you can tell law enforcement without being involved. You can tell them anonymously and you'll never have to be attached to this case. The one thing that's kind of keeping my hopes up about this case being solved is the fact that none of these people are very close anymore. Jessica herself said that anyone on this trip does not talk anymore, and hopefully one of these bonds will break and someone won't trust someone else and they will tell the whole truth. That's just kind of what I'm holding out for right now. But if there's any further information that you guys have about this case, please leave it down below, because I definitely don't want to miss out on any information, and if I did, I want it, and I want you guys to have all the information too, so if I missed out on any, leave it down below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe. Also, make sure to comment down below other cases that you guys want me to cover on this channel. I will have linked down below other cases that I've covered, so you guys can go binge watch those videos if you're intrigued by them. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys later. Bye!